I want to welcome up our sponsor, Control Technologies. I think it's Tommy. Is Tommy here? Yep, there he is. You want to come on up? Thank you, Tommy. Helped sponsor today's lunch. So appreciate it.
I'll keep this brief, but my name's Tommy Anderson. I'm with Control Technologies, and I just want to thank ITS Georgia for giving us the opportunity to sponsor this luncheon, and we really appreciate all the good work you guys are doing out here for the state of Georgia and ITS in Georgia. And I also want to let you guys know, Control Technologies, we do an event out at Road Atlanta. It's going to be on October the 12th. It's the Petite Le Mans, the 10-hour race. And we want to invite any of you that would like to come out to participate in that. It's on Saturday the 12th. I've got some flyers here. I'll leave them up at the desk up here. So if anybody's interested in coming out, just give us a call and we'll get you a ticket, and I'd like to see you guys out there. So once again, thanks to ITS Georgia.
Thank you, Tommy. With that being said, I will call up Kristen. I think she's going to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce our panel for speakers today.
Today's moderator for the Road User panel will be Michael Sullivan, also known as Sully. He is the president and CEO of ACC Georgia. He currently serves on a number of boards, including GRETA, Georgia Transportation Alliance, and Council for Quality Growth. Sully has also been named Georgia Trends Magazine annual list of 100 most influential Georgians. Sully and his wife Rebecca have 2 children, Grace and Nash. The Sullivans live here in Gwinnett and attend Grace Fellowship Church in Snellville. Please welcome Sully.
Thank you so much, and thanks to ITS for having this meeting in Gwinnett. That was really, really kind of you. The commute was a lot shorter this morning than it was driving down to Peachtree Center downtown. So ACC Georgia is the trade association for Georgia's engineering industry. So I'm in a room looking at many of you. Hey boss, how you doing? Good to see you. Good to see so many of my bosses in the room. And this Road Users panel is really focused on the impacts of technology, and that's something that we as an organization are thinking a lot about, both how that's going to change what we do and how we do it in the engineering industry. And so we've got a great panel of a great and diverse panel, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just call on up while I introduce all 4 of you. We have Karen Winger, AICP, who is the Transit Division Director, Gwinnett County Department of Transportation. Karen holds a bachelor's degree in communication and a master's degree in business administration from the University of Massachusetts. She comes to Gwinnett County with more than 20 years of experience in all systems all over the country, and that experience includes both public and private sector positions related to operations, planning, compliance, business development, and contract management. In 2014, she was selected as one of Mass Transit's top 40 under 40, which is a national recognition of young talent in the transit industry. In 2017, she was recognized as Georgia Transit Association's Manager of the Year. Frank Cephas is the Assistant Chief in the Operations Division with the Gwinnett County Department of Fire and Emergency Services. Fred has been in his firefighting career since 1996, which began in the United States Air Force, where he was trained as a Department of Defense aircraft rescue firefighter. He joined the department in 2001, has since earned numerous certifications as a polygrapher. That's lie detection tests. Hopefully you don't have it. I'm a lawyer, so you can just assume. Certified ambulance privacy officer and paramedic, where he's able to serve in various capacities. Chief Cephas oversees the operations division, which is the department's largest division, consisting of more than 700 sworn personnel and 31 fire stations located across the county. Previously, Chief Cephas manages the department's strategic planning section and served as the agency's privacy officer and accreditation manager. He earned his bachelor's degree in business administration and an MBA from Shorter University. Ilka McConnell is the strategic and economic development manager for the Gwinnett County Administrator's Office. As strategic and economic development manager for Gwinnett County government, Ilka McConnell has been thinking about where to go and how to get there. So this is a really good panel for you to be on. Ms. McConnell previously served as Vice President for Economic Development at Athens Technical College. She also worked in public service and outreach at the University of Georgia, including 8 years with the Archway Partnership in Hartwell, Hart County, facilitating strategic community economic development efforts, community engagement, and helping connect higher education resources to address community identified needs and priorities. And last, but definitely not least, Jeffrey Short, Senior Research Associate with the American Transportation Research Institute. Jeffrey is a Senior Research Associate with the ATRI. His areas of expertise include freight and data management and analysis, including truck safety, technology, and performance measurement. With more than 15 years of experience working directly with vehicle probe data, Mr. Short has been integral in expanding the scale and scope of ATRI's truck GPS research. He holds a BA from Emory University and an MS from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Please join me in giving all of our panelists a warm welcome this morning. All right, so let's start off by finding out a little bit more about you, although the biographies tell us a little bit. Of course, I'm getting a phone call right as I'm using this for my notes. Sorry, Ted, you're going to have to wait. Tell us a little bit about what you do in your current role, and then also what sorts of technology, the ways technologies and technological change has most significantly impacted your industry in the last 5 years. And we'll start with you.
Okay, so one of the things I do every single day is take a look at all of the truck GPS data that's come in overnight, make sure everything's okay. It's billions and billions of truck position points that we keep in a large database, flat file database that we access for analyses and whatnot. On the other side of things, I spend a lot of time writing papers about trucks. Not a lot of people can say that. Most recently, I've been writing about the interactions between the trucking industry and the tolling industry, and how much money is going into the tolling industry from the trucking industry. And it's a lot of money, and it's not necessarily going towards infrastructure. So what technology has impacted the trucking industry the most? I would say that would be the electronic logging device. In the past couple of years, this has been mandated by the federal government. A lot of trucking companies were using electronic logging devices to keep track of their hours of service. So a driver had to mark down how many hours he was driving, he or she was resting, etc. You could do that on a paper log, or you could do it with an ELD, which is very precise. It knows exactly where you are, where you've been. Some drivers didn't like that change. There were drivers who might have had more flexibility before the change. But now, all of this data is being collected, and it's a fair playing field for the entire industry. And that has been a huge change. It has tightened capacity.
My kids feel the same way about Life 360. A lot more flexibility before they got that installed on their phones.
I think for economic development, it's not necessarily a new technology, but it's one that's being used more and more, not just in urban, suburban, and rural communities, but it's GIS. Looking at the ways that economic developers and developers and planners and governments can use data in new ways to uncover new opportunities for businesses, to make connections between existing data that maybe people weren't able to visualize or see before, because data sort of existed in separate silos that were not united, and you definitely couldn't see it in a geographic or in a visual way. So I think that's probably one of the most exciting aspects. Also for strategy, just thinking about the county operations, and how to unite data that's out there in new ways that's helpful for the businesses in our community, for businesses that are thinking about maybe locating to our community, and then just to help our citizens understand what resources and opportunities are available.
My name is Fred Cephas. I work for Gwinnett County Fire Department. I've been there for about 18 years. I'm over the operations division. That is all the 31 stations strategically located throughout the county to provide services to all the citizens and residents and visitors to this county. We're charged with responding to all fire, medical emergencies, and any other emergencies that you can think of. And we do this by being intentional about the resources we have and strategizing how we can keep up Now, the technological advances that have mostly affected us, I think, is the first thing I think about is safety. You can imagine back in the day, we have people that still work here today that back in the day used to jump off the back of a fire truck, if you can all picture that, to go to a call. But can you imagine that, somebody driving down 85 highway in this day and time, jumping off the back of a fire truck in response to a call? It doesn't happen because we have safety equipment now that we take advantage of all the time. The other big issue for us is how do we get the closest person to that emergency as quick as we can? So what kind of technology is out there that can locate us to see where we are and to send the right appropriate resources to that emergency at any time? So that was my answer for that.
So my name is Karen. Been the transit director here at Gwinnett County for 4 years here in December. It's been an interesting just coming down. I'm from Boston, originally doing transit in the south, just because of what's been going on in the Atlanta area and the opportunities for transit in Gwinnett County. I use this analogy, and I probably will continue to use this analogy for a long time, that I feel like my job every day is building the airplane while we're flying it. But it's an exciting time, and it's also an exciting time to be in transit in general, just with the technology opportunities we have. So if I think of two off the top of my head of just kind of the greatest impacts we have, is transit is probably a little late to the big data game, but we've been collecting data for a long time. When I was a bus driver at UMass, we actually had an early military contract to do early ADL systems with cell phones in 2001. So that's not new, but using that data to make decisions and then to be able to cross-reference against farebox data or location data is new. So being able to use that to make decisions to make better transit services is definitely kind of a new, and it's almost, if you're not doing this now, you're not making the best service available. And then the other kind of interesting challenge is that the buses basically roll around with a server on the bus now. I got a computer system, I have automatic vehicle location, I have Wi-Fi. If you get on a local bus, there's literally a server right behind them. And the challenge on that is that having technicians capable enough to maintain that service. You can't just have a diesel mechanic that maintains the bus the same way you did. We need to now have electronic techs that can maintain the fare payment system, the Wi-Fi, and the server network to ensure that the service that we provide on the street is still great service. And then one of the other impacts, which will sort of lead into the second question, is the opportunity of all that data and how it will lead into connectivity with not just transit users, but all road users.
So Gwinnett County buses have more technology and more computing power than the Apollo spacecraft did 50 years ago.
Yeah, probably.
So we've been looking kind of retrospectively at technology, but what are the technologies that you see on the horizon the next 5 years or so that are going to have you, well, what are you most excited about that you see on the horizon technologically speaking? Things that are on the horizon, things that are in the near future that have you most excited about the impact on your industry?
I guess I'll start. I think from a safety perspective, technologies on board a truck that, such as forward collision warning, that sort of thing, as those advance and are able to not only detect other vehicles, but people, and there's brake assist involved, etc. I think that's a great thing for safety. And also having that on cars is really wonderful because a lot of cars run into trucks. They run into trucks all the time, and if that can be prevented through some kind of brake assist or, and the same thing goes for cars and pedestrians and bicycles, et cetera, et cetera. So I think those kind of technologies are really exciting.
Do you think we're going to see more platooning in the future, in the near future? Platooning of trucks?
Platooning's difficult because it can only be used in certain areas, and then there has to be kind of an agreement for who's going to be the front truck versus who's, 1 back, 2 back, 3 back. It is quite possible as the autonomous technology comes along, though, that this will be more common. I would think it would be more common in longer stretches, such as, let's say, I-10 in West Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, that kind of thing.
So really boring roads like I-10 and I-16 and something about east-west roads. I don't know what it is. They're all really terribly boring. Okay, no, you next.
I think for me, actually, some of the connected vehicle technologies, but more in the context of how they can interact with economic development. So if you look at Metro Atlanta, obviously, we have many people going many directions at all times of the day and night. And to think about that in a straightforward fashion in terms of preempting a traffic light so that an emergency vehicle can go through, or allowing a pedestrian to cross a street and have that interacting with the vehicles and with the traffic lights. That's interesting in and of itself, but then the feedback loop with thinking about how a large distribution center or a fulfillment center that may be operating 24/7, how can that same data then come back to them to help them figure out when to deploy the traffic in and out of their facility in such a way that it, what is that word? There's synergy within the ecosystem of the traffic that's happening at the same time with people commuting to go to work, going out maybe for lunch, and the patterns that kind of happen over time with commuting. I mean, everyone's phone tells them when they go to their car in the evening, like, it's 56 minutes to get to your house, traffic is light. But wouldn't it be neat when we get to the stage where industries like trucking, even your commute home there would be more of a feedback loop so that it's more of an ecosystem where each is kind of watching the other, and then you're getting more optimal times to be able to route traffic so that maybe you can abate a little bit of the traffic jams as they're happening. Or even think about employee scheduling in new ways and how that maybe interacts with traffic.
We'll figure it out here.
You guys are really territorial about your microphones. Of course, we don't want to have both of them at the other end.
Yes, first thing that comes to mind is fire protection systems like sprinkler systems, standpipe systems, things of that nature. If you think back in the day, we had large hotel fires that injured or killed a lot of people because we didn't have these systems in place. Now that doesn't happen because these systems are in place. So I'm kind of interested to see and know where are we going in the future. How does this impact even residential structures? Because that just makes things safer for you and safer for me. And to touch on some things this young lady was saying, preemption technology, I'm very excited about, because one of our issues is getting to that emergency as fast and quick as we can to mitigate that incident. And with this technology, communicating with traffic lights and possibly with connected vehicles and clearing an intersection before we even arrive, this is going to do two things, or even more things. It's going to decrease accidents. It's going to get us to the scene safer, and it's going to reduce our response times to that scene to mitigate whatever we got to mitigate. So I'm very excited about that. I can't wait. I wish it was here right now.
Fred and Ilka set me up very nicely for this. Yeah, we didn't even plan this, it just happened to work out this way. So what I get very excited about is not AV, which you would think is the transit person I would be, right? It's coming, but not as soon as maybe we would like. But what I get really excited about is if we think about right now, I know where my vehicles are. We can talk to the signals. We know what the traffic is. What if users could make their transportation choices looking at all modes? And all those modes could talk to each other, so I could make my trip choice. Maybe there's a little bit of driving, maybe there's a little bit of transit, and there's a little scooter ride at the end, or a carpool with a friend. We have a lot of the pieces already, but I need someone much smarter than me to write the algorithm for that. And then the next step you take that is, generally the reason why people like heavy rail or light rail over buses is because it's frequent and reliable. In Seattle, one of the reasons why they're seeing an increase in bus service is because they have frequent and reliable bus service. So if I know where the buses are, and if I know what the traffic signals are doing, can I now start to coordinate buses so they actually make their connections the way the rail connections do? And what if I can do this all in my smartphone? And the region is moving towards the very first piece of that. The ATL, with a coordinated effort through MARTA, Gwinnett County Transit, Cobb, Greta, even Douglas and Cherokee, submitted an FTA IMI Innovative Mobility Grant. So we are working first to call, they didn't name it, I wanted to name it the one after them all, but came up with another name. To do the first step of that, to start to coordinate at least all the transit services together, but then, my dream, again, I'm asking hopefully someone here much smarter than we can develop this, then how can we start to put that powerful information so people can make those choices, and then you talk about the feedback loop that goes back to public safety and economic development, if I know where all people are trying to go, or what time they're trying to go, can we coordinate with police schedules? Can we, put improved lighting there to make it a safer intersection? So that gives me help. Someone who built that for me, thank you.
Karen, building on that, so yeah, it would be nice if we had one app that would allow me to see all my transit options and pay for all those transit options without having, that's a basic interoperability that we don't quite have yet in Atlanta. What about breaking down the barrier between, because you talked a lot about all the different modes, breaking down the barrier between public sector providers of transportation and private sector providers of transportation? Because one of the challenges of transit, of course, is that last mile connectivity. Could you foresee a world where that one app to rule them all not only includes all of your publicly provided transit options, but also provides Uber or Lyft and last mile connectivity? We're not going to get into scooters, that's way too controversial.
So one of the things that the IMI grant in particular is working on is it's building off the Open Trip Planner project that TriMet did, which did have, to start with, the deep linking to Uber, not fully integrating the app. Deep linking is kind of the first step to get it integrated. But we are thinking about that how to include both the public and private options. And then by keeping it open source, it makes much more open for both public and private entities, and also to kind of taking the general transit speed specifications, pretty commonality for fixed route and commuter, but how do you do that for new microtransit services, or the other micro mobilities, or even just I happen to be driving by the transit station and I could take someone down the road. So that's kind of the next step. So we're hopefully, if we get awarded that grant, it would be building on that open platform in the next step. So.
And possibly even changing the billing to more of a demand-based billing rather than just it's $250 regardless of when you're going and how much
I haven't got that far out. I mean, right now I'm just trying to get us all in a coordinated, regional fare system.
Baby steps.
But that fare policy definitely can influence how people use
Sure.
transit services as well. I don't think the region's quite there yet, though.
So we've talked about connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles. We talked about smart cities, smart building technology. Being in the future, being very exciting, those things don't magically materialize. They have to be built and paid for. Let's talk about the kinds of infrastructure, smart cities, smart buildings infrastructure, enhanced GIS capabilities, whatever it is. What are those investments that the public and private sector needs to make this kind of neat technological future that we're talking about this morning happen? Karen, we'll start with Karen since you're always starting.
I think what helps is, I don't know if any of you guys were able to go out to Peachtree Corners, that new Curiosity Lab. The city putting that infrastructure in place, putting some of that public money forward to allow an incubator to really test some of these technologies is a great first step. A lot of these autonomous vehicles and the 5G has been tested in closed environments, but what happens when you put it on a real road? You gotta try it sometime. Where they have it running is a great test bed. I think that's one place where we can start to see that start to go. And some of it was with this innovative technologies. Like I'm really lucky with our microtransit pilot that we were able to kind of plan it to a certain point and just sort of throw it out there. And I think that's the other thing with these technologies. At some point you can't plan it for 12 years if it's a technology thing. At some point you just gotta rip the Band-Aid off and try it out and see how it goes. And that's why it's a pilot.
Karen, can you unpack, I know what the microtransit project is, can you unpack for anybody in the audience that doesn't know what Gwinnett County's microtransit project is?
Sure. So for 6 months in Snellville, we ran what was called a microtransit pilot project. And what it does is it takes kind of Uber pool and put it more of a public spin on it. So one of the challenges or fears that some people have with Uber is that the drivers aren't gone through a safety program, they don't have a background check. So the nice thing about this is you get to take that disruptive technology of using on-demand services and ordering it through an app, but putting it in a public vehicle that the driver's gone through a full training program and background check. It's a county vehicle, it has the security cameras on it. And then we ran the pilot for free, but eventually we have that same fare payment. The way the app worked is that someone like Uberpool orders a ride, they could go anywhere in a specific zone, from curb to curb. If someone had a mobility challenge and needed a little bit more assistance, they could get door-to-door service, just like ADA. So we could do it all in one vehicle. The pilot actually went like gangbusters. We carried between 250 and 300 people a day by the end of the pilot in Snellville. If you can imagine that. And the county is working towards procuring that app going forward and kind of taking some of the things that I mentioned earlier on the regional IMI grant and some of my dream things to try to think forward on how we can coordinate all those pieces. But it's a really, really nice service too to have in areas where, you know, the sidewalk connectivity isn't quite there, or if you have an older population. Paratransit itself, which is another type of service, can get really expensive, but this gives people mobility options. And what's also nice about it is because you have it's built into the smartphone app, any sort of adaptive technologies that are already built into your cell phone app are available to people using this service. For example, there was a group called the Exceptional Foundation that works with young adults that have aged out of school that have cognitive disabilities. So they're limited in terms of their linguistic abilities, but they can use speech to text, no problem, on the phone. So they were able to order these rides on their own without having to have anyone else help them. And same thing with language adaptivity. As long as your phone can go into Spanish and the app can accept that adaptivity, that app can now go into Spanish. So the accessibility options by kind of leapfrogging with these technologies is actually really great to us, because right now, you know, any documents we have to go through the very painful effort of doing that paper translation and whatnot. So that's also just operationally really exciting for us.
And Chief, what I heard you say is you need the full employment of every ITS engineer in Georgia to redesign all the intersections so that they can prioritize. Yeah.
I'm personally a big fan of bridges, especially over crowded intersections. That's where we have our issue. If anybody by show of hands ever drove on 20 Buford Drive out here in Model, Georgia during Christmas? Now imagine us trying to get by going to an emergency call. It's almost impossible. So yeah, that's why I'm a big fan of that type of infrastructure. But going back to the preemption technology, you know, whatever towers, whatever servers, whatever Bluetooth technology, I'm not sure what technologies need to put in place for that to work. But my thought is, how do we have plan A, plan B, plan C to, you know, if this breaks down, what is going to compensate that malfunction? And also, how do we protect these systems? Cybersecurity, can anybody get in these systems and manipulate them some type of way? That's what I'll be concerned about, because we don't have the luxury doing an emergency response to deal with some of those issues. That'll be my concern as far as infrastructure.
Engineers are good at redundant systems to make sure that it's going to work.
So I know this is a technology group, but I'm going to totally go old school on y'all now and build off of something that Karen was saying about mobility and last mile connectivity. I think one of the challenges that we have in the metro, especially in the more suburban counties, kind of like Gwinnett, is this idea of parts of the suburbs becoming more urban. So there's a lot of talk now about mixed use, you know, communities, but how do you design those as transportation experts, or even as planners and developers, to figure out how to not have those be islands of connectivity where you can walk around that island, but should you want to go somewhere else, you're stuck. So thinking about how do you build out these suburbs that we have and make parts more connected to one another, so that you could ride your bike to the bus stop and not feel like you were going to get run over, or a pedestrian wouldn't have to cross a 7-lane highway going through, you know, from their neighborhood to get to somewhere else. It's just kind of trying to think more about how do you connect some of these neat ideas that are coming through in terms of planning and development. You see a lot of the cities in Gwinnett are starting to create environments like that sort of within their cores, which is awesome. It's such a great thing to see, having grown up in Gwinnett in an unincorporated area that's now incorporated. But to see how those connections are starting to be made. But I think that is the next challenge, is thinking kind of back to how to design for a human scale so that humans can move around and get around. And how that impacts economic development, because younger generations are not even getting their driver's licenses when they turn 16. The ages at which people are getting driver's licenses are getting older and older. People don't necessarily want to drive. And you can see with the return of people moving more towards cities and into Atlanta, people really like that feeling that you can walk and get somewhere. So just kind of thinking a little bit about that. Like, mixed use is amazing. It's a great step. It's good to see it happening. But how do you connect it with other things and then connect it to transit and scooters and some of those other ways of getting around.
That's a great point.
Okay, from an infrastructure perspective, the trucking industry is obviously concerned about moving freight, and any delays in that freight movement obviously are going to be expensive from fuel and from a driver cost perspective to not meeting deadlines and that sort of thing. So a place like Atlanta, it's drawing a lot of freight into it, and there are a tremendous number of bottlenecks in Atlanta on the interstates. In particular, take something like Spaghetti Junction, which is right down 85. That's one of the worst bottlenecks in the United States of America. I don't know how to fix it. There's just too many vehicles going through at the same time. What the solution is probably both technology and pavement. I'm not sure how the pavement piece fits in, but from a technology perspective, just somehow moving the freight and the cars, particularly at peak travel times, through those choke points is critical to efficient freight movement. So that's one thing I would like to see focused on.
May I?
Yeah, absolutely, Chief.
When these people were talking, I was thinking about in the initial planning of these communities and connected places, are we considering public safety in that initial planning? Because I find out a lot of times we as public safety have to adjust to what is already put in place. And that's fine, but can we come up with something collectively and collaboratively together? You think about some of these places that are built, they're not built for a large fire truck to get in to help somebody. They don't. So now we got to look at smaller vehicles to possibly get in to help you. So can we all sit at the table before we put these things together and just make it worthwhile for everybody and keep safety in mind?
That's a great point, Chief, and I think that leads us to our next question. Let's say your answer had been barrier-separated freight truck lanes on the interstate highways. So here's the question. That wasn't your answer, so I'm not saying that's your answer. Would have been a good answer, though. That's a great idea. Some people would say that's a great idea, right? What are the unintended consequences of that? It may be very difficult for the chief to get his trucks into a barrier-separated lane to provide emergency response. So a good idea with unintended consequences. Another example was like Chatham County had deployed a mesh network of sensors that were detecting water levels around Chatham County. Unintended consequence was insurance companies became very interested in that data and who they were going to insure and what their rates would be. So what are this is the last question. I want to open it up to the floor after this question, so be thinking of a good question. No bad questions. What are the unintended consequences of some of the technological things that we're going to be doing or we're thinking about doing that we need to be mindful of as an industry when we're planning for these kinds of changes?
I would say one of the biggest unintended consequences for trucking with automation, the talk of automation, actually moving trucks without drivers, doing that as a demonstration, is the impact it has on our current drivers. People don't want to enter the industry because they think they're going to be replaced by a robot, essentially. And I don't see that as being the case anytime soon. Even with level 5 automation, I think there's still a use for the driver, especially in urban areas. Maybe the vehicle can move level 5 on an interstate, which means it does not need the driver. That's a great time period for a driver to take his or her hours of service, to rest, possibly do other jobs, be part of the logistics, be part of even sales, anything. There are tons of different opportunities there if the driver is freed up on long, broad interstate corridors. But that driver will need to be there in the truck for many decades to come, either at the delivery point, customer service point, or to just be with the vehicle for safety purposes.
So to sort of talk about trucking or distribution as well, one of the things that has happened with online retail becoming so popular and so many people choosing to order things online because it's delivered quickly.
It's because they went to the Mall of Georgia at Christmas time.
Right. But they're connected, right? Like sometimes you think, well, you know, I need to buy a new pair of socks, but I don't feel like going to Target at this time of the day and fighting the traffic and parking. I can just sit in front of the TV with my laptop and order some new socks and they'll be here within 2 days and I have Prime and it's free. So one of the things that distribution centers and fulfillment centers are starting to do is they're starting to locate in former big box stores in the middle of residential areas, whereas previously they might have been located within more industrial corridors on the edges of large cities and large metros. So that's an interesting question because now you have those little branded Amazon trucks that are within residential areas where they were not there previously, and then the traffic that is introduced. So just kind of thinking, on one hand, the decline of in-person, or at least the shifting of in-person retail, does remove some cars from roads. People aren't driving and parking and shopping and then driving some more. But on the other hand, now you have these little hummingbirds. I just made up a new species, y'all. These little hummingbirds of like activity driving in and out and in and out and in and out. And, you know, it's awesome to be able to order almost anything you want and get it within 2 or 3 days. But how does that then impact residential neighborhoods and traffic flows and that sort of thing, and people's expectations for where certain types of business activities happen in relation to where they live?
I'm ready for the buzz of drones in my neighborhood dropping off presents all day long.
Speaking of bumblebees, first thing I think about is dependency, and the first thing I wouldn't want to happen is for some of our driver engineers to be so dependent on these preemption technology that they don't use due regard when coming to the intersection and just blow right through it, and it ends up creating something that we don't want to happen. Or a bad signal is put out that's telling the driver or anybody connected vehicle to do something that they shouldn't do, and ends up causing an accident. So those are the things, unintended consequences that I think could happen if we don't have the right fail-safes in place, and we don't have, if we are too dependent on the system, like we are calculators.
I like my calculator. One of the things I kind of think about when, you know, we start to plan, you know, these great mixed-use walkable areas and a great connected system with all transportation modes is how do we make sure we include all citizens? You kind of hear a little bit on the belt line, but it's not the sexy topic, but equitability, yeah. But affordable housing, and how do you make sure that, you know, every child gets the opportunity to have the same level of education. In Gwinnett County, we're lucky with that. But that's something that, you know, again, you see Seattle just because they have great success in transit, but in downtown, housing is becoming very expensive. So if you are an entry-level employee, it's harder for you to find affordable housing in that area and you've been pushed out. So that's one thing that while we're building these great areas that are, you know, great for most people, how do we make sure that it's inclusive for all people?
All right, you have before you 4 world-class experts in different modes of transportation use. What questions do you have for these panels this morning, or this afternoon, I should say? All right, now thank you. This can't be one of those engineer meetings where there's no questions and then everybody comes up and asks, so I had a question, I didn't want to ask you.
My question is, and kind of putting this panel together, one thing I've experienced being on the engineering side and focused on what we as engineers focus on, which is we think we know how to design the roads and stuff for the users. And so that's how we design it, without even thinking about going to the fire chiefs and having conversations with them on what their issues are when they try to go down 120th, at the mall. I can't even imagine, I stay far away from that. I think what I would like to hear from each of you so that we could all collectively think about this, because right now you have signal timing engineers in here, you have planners in here, you have ears of technology people who can come up with some of these crazy things that have already come up with these crazy things that you guys are talking about. I have, I guess, a twofold question. One question is, if we don't collectively get you guys at the table, transit, freight, vulnerable road users and all the planning that goes with that, and especially emergency responders and things like that. If we do not get you guys at the table when we're trying to determine and design and do all that stuff, what could ultimately happen? We need to kind of know the consequences, because right now I don't feel like we're all at the table. I don't feel like we're talking to the road users. What are your needs? We need to kind of have that at the forefront. I mean, safety, as an engineer, we all sign something that says safety needs to be number one. Sometimes that gets pushed in the back of our head because we have this huge problem here in Atlanta trying to move vehicles, you know, single occupancy vehicles through this city, which causes a lot of congestion. So we sometimes forget about the safety aspect or these other ideas, and we start focusing on one thing because we're engineers, we narrow-minded, we like tunnel vision, focus on this. So what can we do? Like, I want to know the urgency, the sense of urgency from you guys on if we don't come together and plan and do these things together, and even when we're thinking about signal timing and throughput, we don't also take into consideration emergency vehicles or transit or what have you. What are we left with? What happens?
What are the bad things that'll happen, and what would you tell us to help us not make those bad things happen?
I can certainly kick that off. I'll give two examples. The first example is I recently read a transcript. It's from a different state, but it was a complete streets meeting. And the person leading that meeting on the planning side was asked, how will trucks be used in this plan? And they said they hadn't thought through that since trucks aren't a mode of transportation. So I don't know what they're a mode of, but it's important to have trucks bringing all sorts of things in. I'll give you another example. I live in Decatur, and they've done lots of sidewalk widening and road diets, and that's great for me. But when I go down to some of the restaurants in Oakhurst, I expect to have my food, etc. But now the trucks that bring that food are parking right in the middle of the road, whereas they had far more space. And people start complaining about that in some of the online forums. It's like, you want your sidewalk or you want your craft beer? What do you want? The truck needs to park somewhere. So definitely trucking needs to be at the table for everyone's sake, in particularly the urban planning process. It can't be forgotten. We're working on some research in that area right now. Hopefully we'll have something published in the next couple months.
So planners, don't be utopian. We still need trucks to bring us stuff. And they don't need to be parking in the middle of the road, which is what happens now downtown Atlanta.
From an economic development perspective, businesses will not want to locate here. Or if they're here and they're growing and they want to expand and they're hearing from their employees that traffic is too much of a hassle and it's a big issue in terms of community and quality of life, they may not choose to expand here. They may choose to locate somewhere else. It's definitely part of the site selection process. They look at average commuter times within communities when they're going around the country looking for suitable sites. I think probably you could amplify that more for international companies because of, differing cultural expectations among company leadership for how long a long commute is. My mother's German, has lived in Peachtree Corners for the last 30, 40 years, and she still thinks an hour is too far to go anywhere. That's just a really deeply ingrained, she's lived in America longer than she ever lived in Germany by this point, but that's a really deeply ingrained cultural expectation. And Atlanta is a huge magnet for German companies. And I've read in different economic development journals that that's one of the issues that companies will raise when they come to metros that have traffic challenges. So that's something that businesses look for. That's something that young workforce looks for. That's a site selection criteria. Like those businesses are looking at your population within a certain age range, and they're choosing whether or not to locate by whether or not they've got enough people in the population that they think they'll be hiring to fill their positions. And if people don't want to come to a community, then that makes it hard for that business to choose to locate there because they need to have their pipeline of talented folks there. Can't train them.
For the fire department, we're charged with keeping this county safe. And we do as much projecting as we can to understand what is possibly coming to this county. For instance, we kind of can expect an economic boom to continue. And where are these businesses going? Where are they're building residents? Because maybe we need to put a fire station in that area so we can make sure service gets there. We know that this county is growing a lot, and we may have to grow up because we're running out of space wide. So we now have to change our firefighting tactics of how we're going to deal with high-rise incidents, because we don't deal with that a lot here like Atlanta does. So we have to keep that in mind. So if we're not at the table understanding what new technology is out there, and if we're not sitting coming up with this plan together, you're going to have a delay in service to that personnel. I mean, I'm thinking now, we're going to eventually need a helicopter because I can't get from this fire station to across the Mall of Georgia due to traffic. So I think you're going to have a delay in service, and that is what's important to us.
Jetpacks.
I like that idea.
I want a jetpack. Gosh, what was my thought? Oh, so one, I'm gonna speak for the crowd, I'm gonna assume everybody here, none of us bite. So if you have questions about your project, and not that I like meetings just to have meetings, but come by and say, hey, how does this project impact what you do? And I will throw another shout out to Peachtree Corners. When they were working on that Curiosity Lab, they came back and said, how does this impact your buses? And there was a little tweak we made to make sure that the project, they were able to do what they were doing, their goals were for the project, but it was a little safer for us. So that's the first little, PSA. And then the other is that, kind of sounds doom and gloom, but, at the end of the day, if you look at communities where people want to live, it's the communities where all those uses are able to be combined. So kind of planning in those silos, you're going to end up having those towns left behind in areas that are not thriving. And I'm not from Germany, I'm from the US, and I also think an hour is too far to go. So it's not just a German thing, I think a lot of us would prefer to have, I'd rather have everything locally and support things locally. So, but yeah, none of us might.
Well, I would remind Ilka and Karen and Karen's mom that the phrase in Atlanta is even Atlanta is an hour from Atlanta. So everything's an hour apart. Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I know you guys plan to stop at 1, but hopefully our speakers can stick around for a few minutes for those folks who didn't get to ask a question, but maybe had a question that you wanted to run by our speakers. But you got a lot of food for thought here this morning. I hope your definition of who is a stakeholder in the planning process has maybe been expanded. Maybe think about some other voices that need to be part of that process when we were coming up with those plans and designs, and being more inclusive and getting more voices in the room. Please join me in thanking the panelists for being with us this morning.
Thank you guys, we appreciate it. Just a couple quick announcements and then I'll let you guys go. Membership, please join if you have any questions. You can come see one of us or you can join online. But our next social event, November 8th at Ormsby, West Midtown. Awards, send in your nominations, they close on Friday. Our awards banquet will be Wednesday, November 13th. And last but not least, please come join us at our annual meeting, October 6th to the 8th. Conference registration and hotel registration are open online. If you would like to be an exhibitor, we still have some openings there. But thank you all for coming out, and thank you guys, and hope to see you all in Athens in a couple weeks.